Welcome back to Politics Nation. Let's bring in my political panel, former Republican congressman from Pennsylvania and senior advisor to our Republican legacy, Charlie Dent, and the CEO and founder of All In Together, Lauren Leder. Charlie, Congress comes back from recess this week. What can we expect Republicans and Democrats to actually accomplish together by the end of the year? Might I remind everyone there's a government funding deadline fast approaching in 3 weeks' time on December 20th.
Well, as a former member of the House Appropriations Committee, I can tell you that the funding deadline is everything they really need to focus on right now in Congress. The big question is, will Congress just simply pass another continuing resolution or an extension into the new year, or will they actually try to complete all 12 appropriations bills? I think more of the adults in Congress want to pass the appropriations bills, clear the decks, so to speak. That would actually be in President-elect Trump's best interest, to clear those decks, rather than have to deal with this issue of the current year, the next year's funding, right as he's assuming office and trying to organize his administration. So that's the big question. Will they deal with that, as well as the debt ceiling, which ripens, I believe, on January 2nd, and there won't be a lot of time for Congress to deal with that issue in the new year. I'm not sure that the ability for the Treasury Department to kick that date out further is not likely to happen. So they've got a lot to deal with, but the funding thing should be done. But I get the sense they're going to try to kick it into the new year, which would be a mistake.
Lauren, as if both parties don't have enough on their plates already, Democratic lawmakers on the Hill are now weighing whether to push out aging senior leaders like Representative Jerry Nadler from top posts for younger lawmakers who have more agility to take on Donald Trump. Is this helpful or hurtful? And then the same question to you, Charlie.
Look, I've said for years that I always thought it was problematic that Democrats base so much of their congressional seniority on the number of years that people have served in office, which Republicans don't do. They use a different kind of process to appoint leaders to various committees. And the problem on the Democratic side is that it incents people, obviously, to stay in their seats for incredibly long periods of time because they amass power and the ability to influence these committees. And Jerry Nadler's in that camp. He's been in Congress for decades. And I do think that after what happened in this last election, it's an important time that for Democrats to kind of reevaluate everything about the face of the party and the way that we run things. I don't want to be ageist. Jerry Nadler has served, valiantly for decades, but it is a really critical time for the party to demonstrate that we're agile in terms of leadership and that there are other perspectives. And I've always thought it was a problem. And Nancy Pelosi set the example by handing the reins to Hakeem Jeffries, when she probably could have held on. Some people argue she waited too long, but that's the example we need. We need folks who are, have an incredible ability to communicate, who can make a strong case sitting in those leadership chairs.
Charlie?
Yeah, look, I tend to agree that House Republicans have had an advantage over the Democrats in this regard. House Republicans have not used seniority as a measuring stick to become a committee chair. It happens regularly that a more junior member will surpass a more senior member to get the reins of a full committee chairmanship. It happens regularly, and frankly, it's a good thing. They also have term limits on committee chairs that limit the amount of time anyone can be there. And I think the Democrats have had a problem with longevity. I mean, look what happened with Joe Biden. Obviously, there was a younger generation of Democrats wanting to have the mantle of leadership passed on, and there was a resistance. Obviously, Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, James Clyburn all stuck in there pretty long into their 80s and had a difficult time passing the reins, which they did. But this is a challenge for the Democrats, and we see it with their committee chairs as well in some cases. So I think that the Democrats could learn something from the House Republicans on this issue.
Lauren, Trump is on a tariff threat rampage again. This time he's threatening 100% tariffs at countries in the so-called BRIC alliance if they abandon the U.S. dollar. What are you hearing about the potential real-life impact of Trump's tariff tantrums? And could the people who voted Trump into office be on the outs with him on day one?
You know, one of the remarkable things about Trump is that he manages to convince his supporters that he's done things that sometimes he hasn't actually done. And the threats of tariffs sometimes is actually enough that people then think he's done it in some way, and then they don't see the results or the impact of it on prices because it didn't happen. And I think, you know, this is a lot of saber rattling. And one of the challenging parts about this sort of interim, you know, lame duck period where you've got an incoming, you know, there's one president at a time, but Trump has an enormous ability to influence global markets and, you know, global stability through Truth Social and through the announcement that he made. We already saw him, you know, sort of walk back the threats of massive tariffs against Mexico. It all kind of happened over social media, you know, when he got the pushback, supposedly he got a call. I mean, the whole thing is, it's very theatrical, but I do worry because I think we all understand, and certainly a lot of the very reasonable and rational economists who Trump has appointed to some key posts in his administration understand, you know, what a devastating effect this would have on the global markets. I have a hard time believing he's really going to blow up global markets just to prove a point, but we'll see. We won't know until January.
Charlie, I want to look back at the Democrats' loss of your home state of Pennsylvania. They lost the electoral votes and the Senate race by incumbent Bob Casey last month. As one local Pittsburgh outlet put it, it sowed doubts about whether Pennsylvania might be leaving the ranks of up-for-grabs swing states. What's your take on all this?
Well, Pennsylvania's a swing state now. It'll likely be a swing state for the foreseeable future. But I think it's probably fair to say things are moving a little bit, and we saw that in this election where Republican candidates, and Donald Trump in particular, performed extremely well out in the rural areas, and Democrats underperformed, Kamala Harris underperformed in the city of Philadelphia, as well as I would say even in the suburban communities. And you saw what happened in Pennsylvania happen around the country, where men in particular went hard for the Republicans, including a lot of Hispanic men. And so that's an issue for the Democrats to deal with. So Republicans right now I think, feel ascendant and empowered. But you have to temper that because, you know, we're going to have a midterm, and that will be a referendum. That 2026 midterm will be a referendum on the party in power. So I don't say anything is permanent in this business, but I think Pennsylvania, if I had to say anything right now, it's still a purple state, maybe a slight tinge of red, but the slightest.
And Lauren, you're already thinking about next year's Women's March with Trump back in office. Your recent op-ed is titled, "Will the 2025 Women's March Galvanize or Repel?" What concerns you this time around, and will we see you on the front lines? Because I'm hearing some doubts from you.
Look, I will continue to do the work that I've been doing for a decade, which is advocating for gender equality in every dimension of American society, in politics and in business, and I will never back off of that. I think the question that I raised in the piece, which frankly, Rev, comes from a lot of our peers and many of the extraordinary women who you know who were at the forefront of organizing the women's marches in 2017, and frankly, from a lot of African-American women who are questioning whether or not the resources are best used with a march or whether they should be invested into the grassroots organizing that's going to need to continue into the coming years. And I just think that there is a time and a place for everything. I'm a believer in, you know, political dissent, obviously, and in marching. They've been critical to American democracy. I know you're organizing a march, and I support that. But what I wanted to just report was this sense that I'm hearing from so many women leaders, and as I say, many African-American women who just feel it would be performative to do it now, that the issues are deep and that they require a more sustained and deeper focus than just showing up to march. And that was the point I was trying to make. I think people will turn out, but I think it's also an important time to consider the ways to organize in this very challenging time for so many groups that will be sustainable.
Yeah, I think we should not call marches, I don't, without having follow-up in local communities. Otherwise, it's performative. Marches are to energize people for work, not think that's the work itself. Former Congressman Charlie Dent and Lauren Leader, CEO of All In Together, thank you both for being with us. Up next.